We've all got that one number stuck in our heads. You know the one? The $1 million target. It's the goal we're told we have to hit if we ever want to stop working. But for a lot of us, doing the mental math late at night only leads to one thing: stress. Maybe you even avoid opening your 401k statements altogether because that gap between what you have and what you're supposed to have feels completely out of reach. It's like there's this unspoken rule. If you aren't a millionaire by your 50s, you've somehow messed up. Like you just didn't do what you were supposed to do to get ready for retirement. But what if that $1 million goal doesn't tell the whole story? Over the next few minutes, we're going to look at why the standard advice for retirement might not fit everyone's real life. I want to show you why the usual math is often way more conservative than it needs to be, and why your actual situation might be a lot more secure than it feels right now. It's hard to see that security, though, when the world around us is constantly raising the stakes. Not that long ago, $1 million was the big goal everyone aimed for if they wanted to retire, but lately it feels like that target just keeps getting further away. Now, you will hear experts on the news suggesting you might need $2 or even $3 million just to get by. It's exhausting to even think about. And if you're a middle-class saver in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, you're the one dealing with all that pressure. You've worked hard and you've made sacrifices. Yet, it feels like the media is always implying that if you aren't hitting these huge numbers, you just aren't doing enough. It's natural to worry because the economy is definitely tough right now. But a lot of that panic might actually be misplaced. That anxiety isn't your fault. It's the result of a financial culture that often focuses on the most extreme, worst-case scenarios. The truth is, it is harder for us than it was for our parents. And that's not because we're doing something wrong. It's because the way retirement works has completely changed over the last 40 years. We're often told that if we don't have enough, it's because we bought too much coffee or too many gadgets. But that's a distraction. It makes you blame yourself while ignoring the massive changes in our economy over the last 40 years. 50 years ago, retirement was usually the company's job. You worked for a business, and in return, they gave you a pension, a check every month for life. The company took the risk, but in the 80s, that shifted. The 401k was created, and it was originally just meant to be a little extra perk for executives. Instead, it became the new standard. Suddenly, regular workers were expected to manage their own investments, like professional fund managers, in their spare time. At the same time, wages haven't kept up with the real cost of living. Housing, healthcare, and education costs have all gone through the roof. You aren't failing to save. It's just that a bigger chunk of your check is going toward basic survival than it used to. In 1990, a middle-class family could pay for their life with about half their income. Today, basic survival takes up way more than that. Saving now requires a level of sacrifice that previous generations didn't have to deal with. When people ask, "Why are you saving $1 million?" they're ignoring the fact that most of that money was already spent just keeping a roof over your head. It feels like a game where the rules have shifted, and it's become much harder for the middle class to get ahead. But that culture of panic doesn't just stay on the news. It follows us home. It changes how we see the people living right next door. So let's look at what's really going on behind the scenes, starting with the people you see every day, the people around you. When you look at your neighbors, your coworkers, or the people posting their vacations online, it genuinely feels like everyone else figured out a secret wealth-building code that you somehow missed. They've got the brand new kitchens, the nice cars, and they talk about their investments like it's all just so easy. However, it's easy to fall into a trap where we only see the money people spend, but never the money they actually have. Here's the reality. You see the $60,000 car, you see the new pool, but you don't see their debt. You don't see the empty savings account, and you definitely don't see the stress they're feeling every night. We live in a culture where people feel a lot of pressure to look successful, even if they have to borrow against their future just to pay for today. When we look at the actual data from the Federal Reserve, that illusion of everyone being rich completely disappears. The median retirement savings for American households isn't anywhere near $1 million. It's actually only about $87,000. And if you look at people who are right on the edge of retiring, those in their late 50s and early 60s, the middle of the pack balance is still only around $185,000. Think about that. These are people who've been working for 40 years. They're the same people you see taking the nice trips and driving the nice cars. You feel like a failure because you're comparing your real bank account to the perfect life your neighbors pretend to have. In reality, only about 3% of Americans actually have $1 million in their retirement accounts. But the news and social media hold up that top 3% and act like they're the average, which makes the rest of us think we're falling behind. If you have $250,000 saved, the calculator will tell you that you're behind. But looking at the facts, you are actually doing better than the vast majority of people your age. Most of the wealth you see around you is actually built on a lot of invisible debt. So why is there such a huge gap between what the calculators say we need and what people actually have? It comes down to what I call the straight line myth. Almost every retirement model online assumes your life is going to be a perfectly smooth, uninterrupted line for 40 years. They assume you start at 25, you get a raise every single year, and the stock market never has a bad decade. But life doesn't work like that. Life is unpredictable. Those models don't account for getting laid off at 50 because your company was sold. They don't account for a massive medical bill if you or your spouse gets sick. They don't factor in the reality of being stuck in the middle, trying to pay for a kid's college while also taking care of an aging parent. These aren't rare mistakes. These are the things that happen to almost all of us. While some financial advice suggests you should have saved more in your 30s, that ignores the fact that those years were probably spent on childcare and just trying to afford a home. It's not that you weren't disciplined. It's that there simply wasn't any extra money. The standard models treat life's emergencies like excuses, but in reality, that's just life. A divorce, a major house repair, or being out of work for a few months resets your timeline. And because of how interest works, one setback at age 40 can cut your projected savings at 65 right in half. You're beating yourself up for not being perfect in a world that's constantly changing. That $1 million goal requires 40 years of absolute quiet. Almost no one gets that. When you realize you can't hit that perfect line, you don't just feel disappointed, you feel exhausted. And that's where the stress really starts to take a toll on you. But let's look at what this does to us mentally. If you're in your 50s and you feel like you haven't saved enough, you might find yourself just avoiding the topic altogether. You stop checking your accounts. You change the channel when the retirement commercials come on. You tell yourself you'll look at the budget next weekend, but next weekend never comes. People might call that irresponsible, but I think it's simpler than that. I think you're just exhausted. When a problem feels this big, you just hit a wall. It's not that you don't care, it's that you're just trying to get through the day without feeling defeated. Looking at a small bank account feels like a punch in the gut. It's painful to see, so your mind tries to look at anything else just to stay positive. When you see a balance of $185,000 and a calculator tells you that you need $1.5 million, it doesn't feel like a goal. It feels like a joke. The gap is so huge that you just stop trying to bridge it. You aren't being lazy. You're just protecting your peace of mind. You can't just try harder to stop feeling this way. When you're exhausted from dealing with inflation and just trying to keep up with the bills right now, you don't have anything left in the tank for your 70-year-old self. So much of the advice out there is designed to scare you into doing something. But when you're already stretched to the limit, fear isn't a motivator. It just makes you freeze. If you've been avoiding your numbers, you need to hear this. You aren't broken. You're just reacting to expectations that don't fit your life. The moment you realize that $1 million goal isn't the only way to win, the pressure starts to lift. And once that happens, we can finally look at the actual numbers and see how the traditional math has been scaring us for no reason. This brings us to why we think we need $1 million in the first place. Most financial advice relies on the 80% rule. It claims you need to replace almost your entire paycheck to survive in retirement. If you're making a good living now, that formula tells you that you need millions in the bank just to stay afloat. But here's the irony. If you actually hit that $1 million goal, between your savings and Social Security, you'd likely end up with more take-home pay than you have right now. The math is actually designed to give you a pay raise in retirement, which is why that $1 million target feels so impossible. But the secret is, the 80% rule is often just a rule of thumb that doesn't apply to everyone. Why would you need 80% of your income when your life is going to be totally different? Think about it. When you stop working, you aren't paying payroll taxes anymore. You aren't commuting, buying work clothes, or paying for expensive convenience meals. Most importantly, you aren't saving for retirement anymore. That expense just vanishes overnight. Studies show that retiree spending isn't a flat line. It looks like a smile curve. You might spend a bit more early on while you travel, but then your spending usually drops off as your life gets simpler. It means you don't actually need nearly as much as people say you do. A couple making $100,000 today might realize they only actually need $45,000 a year to live well in retirement. If Social Security covers $35,000 of that, you only need to fill a $10,000 gap. You don't need $1 million for that. You might only need $200,000 or $300,000. Standard models are often built to be overly cautious, which usually requires a mountain of gold that many people don't actually need to be happy. So, what do you do if you're in your 50s or 60s with only a fraction of that million? You change your perspective. You stop worrying about that one giant net worth number and you start focusing on your actual cash flow. A pile of money is a nice thought, but steady cash flow is what actually gives you freedom. You aren't trying to impress a spreadsheet. Your goal is just to make sure you have more money coming in than going out. That's it. If you have $250,000 saved, a Social Security check, and you paid off your major debts, you'll sleep much better than a millionaire who is still struggling with a huge mortgage and a lifestyle they're terrified of losing. Focus on lowering your overhead. Pay off the high-interest debt. Look at where you live. Is it helping your future, or is it just a drain on your present? By lowering your monthly bills, you are effectively buying yourself security without needing to save an extra $500,000. You take your power back by deciding to play a different game. You get to define what enough means on your own terms, not on the terms of some firm in a skyscraper. That $1 million target is a myth. It's an expectation that's been turned into a source of fear. It was designed to keep you on a treadmill, but you don't have to run anymore. If you spent the last decade feeling like a failure because of your bank balance, it's time to let that go. You've navigated a tough system. You provided for your family, you made it through the chaos of a normal life, and you're still here. You aren't behind, you're living in the real world. If this video helped you breathe a little easier, please subscribe. We're building a community here grounded in reality, not fantasies. But more importantly, let me know in the comments, what's your real number now? I think the more we're honest about this stuff, the less scary it all feels. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.